Welcome, one and all, to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you are having a great weekend. You're having a great start to your holiday season. And you know what? There's one thing that America deserves when it comes to the 2025 holiday season, and that is the latest edition of the Coleman and Coleman Law Firm Show. Shawn Coleman here with Scott Coleman to cover the latest, not much in terms of latest, but to cover the latest when it comes to the Atlanta Braves. Scott, happy holidays to you and your family, sure. Always a pleasure. One of the best when it comes to talking Braves. Pleasure to do one of these with you again.
Hey, Shawn, it is always a privilege to bring together the Coleman and Coleman Law Firm. And you're right, man. I mean, the last maybe 72 hours or so for the Braves have been relatively quiet, but we've also had a flurry of activity through the first month and a half of the offseason, a couple of big-time signings and a trade for Atlanta. And we'll see, man. It feels like maybe this upcoming week, not just for the Braves, but across all of Major League Baseball, is going to continue to be a busy one before things then quiet down, usually around Christmas and New Year's, before ramping up again in January.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, that definitely is the case. You know, the Braves have been one of the more active teams out there, but I think this kind of, is a nice segue right into the theme of our show today, a Sunday mailbag show. Many on social media were kind enough to, throw some questions out there for us. And, many of this, similar questions were asked. So we're going to cover a variety of different topics, but I think that that's a nice segue into things. You and Steven Tolbert obviously did a wonderful job breaking down the signings of Mike Yastrzemski as well as Robert Suarez. So the Braves had done a lot of their heavy lifting through free agency so far, adding Iglesias, Suarez, as well as Yastrzemski. They've taken care of some needs. They've taken care of helping the bullpen out, getting some depth, so on and so forth. But to me, the one thing that remains is they made a lot of significant moves, but it still feels like a major move is out there because they have two big spots they really need to address: shortstop and starting pitching, especially depth-wise when it comes to the starting pitching side of things. And Scott, shortstop was a big focus of what a lot of people were asking us about when it comes to these mailbag questions. I know we've talked a lot about the shortstop position. So let's position it first with this. Scott, as of today, we've heard so many names that are out there, some names that are available in free agent, some names that are available in trade. For right now, to what level and what avenue do you feel the Braves it makes the most sense for the Braves to really apply their focus to address the shortstop position?
Great question. And a big thank you to everybody who sent in questions. We got a ton of them, and we're going to do our best to cover as much ground tonight as we can. But if I had to guess, and it is Sunday, December 14th, Monday, December 15th, when folks are going to be listening, my guess is that they will ultimately come to a reunion with Ha-Seong Kim. I think Kim is probably the cleanest, most straightforward way to improve the position in 2026, maybe 2027. But the fact is, Ha-Seong Kim is a Scott Boras client. And Boras clients, things can go sideways. It can drag out. I don't know. And I think that's why we saw the Mauricio Dubon trade so early in the offseason, on the chance that it's going to drag out until February or even early March. You feel like with Dubon, you at least have something of a shortstop in hand, but my guess today would be Ha-Seong Kim.
I think Ha-Seong Kim, to your point, is the cleanest, I don't necessarily know if most certain is the way of doing it, but probably also not as much risk as other potential, moves that are out there. You kind of know what you're getting with Ha-Seong Kim. Again, it's not a star. It's probably league average in a lot of ways, but when you've had the lowest production offensive-wise at shortstop, and you're projected to be that way once again, league averages is a significant upgrade. So I think that I could definitely see that working out. But of course, many of our mailbag questions are going to focus on, the top end sort of things. And, we've heard some rumblings about Corey Seager. We've heard loose tie-ins with the Braves potentially going after Bo Bichette. I will say this. If there was a time for the Braves to make a major move, if there was a time for Alex Anthopoulos to kind of go against how he's operated in the past and be willing either to pay a high price in free agency or pay a high prospect price to take on salary to get a major impact player, right now, with the shortstop position being as big of a need as it is, the offense needing a clear difference maker still, in my opinion, and underperformance over the past couple of years, now would be the time. find it highly unlikely, but I do feel that there's any time now for Alex Anthopoulos to make that type of move, now is the time to do it.
So let's talk about Bo Bichette just for a couple of minutes. We've mentioned Bo's name on the show over the last month and a half. And look, man, there is zero question about Bo Bichette, the hitter. Like, for a middle infielder, this dude is probably top 5, top 10 in baseball. Really, since the day that Bichette came up, he has been a really, really good hitter. He was hurt throughout basically the entirety of 2024, but he was awesome. I mean, he was as good as he's really ever been this past season. Of course, was the shortstop for most of the year with Toronto before coming down with an injury at the very end. The concern with Bichette is his defense. And we have mentioned it on the show. If you look at things like outs above average, which is an advanced defensive metric, Bichette is arguably the worst middle infielder defensively in baseball. And that's a challenge, and that's an obstacle, because Alex Anthopoulos has always prided himself on a good defensive shortstop, whether it was Dansby Swanson or even Orlando Arcia or Nick Allen, who couldn't hit my fastball, but they could really pick it and play some good defense at short. So I would be surprised if it's Bo Bichette. I would hope the Braves are at least going to feel that out and have a conversation. I'm also pretty concerned if Bo Bichette, who's only 27 years old, so he's younger than most free agents, but it feels like, and if you look at some of the contract projections out there, that he's going to get a 7, maybe even 8-year deal. It seems like the Blue Jays, who of course know Bichette and have a lot of money to spend, are also still interested in a reunion. So my guess is that when Bichette signs, it's not going to be with the Braves, and it'll be for a high amount of dollars and years, where I just don't think we'll come on and do a show and go, man, where was Alex on this deal? This seemed really reasonable.
I definitely think that he's going to get 200 plus million. I mean, Robert Murray came on the show a couple of weeks ago and legitimately, I'm paraphrasing this, but legitimately straightforward said he feels that Bo Bichette could land more money than people may project. And that may have changed over time, but I agree with you. The one thing that Alex does value at the shortstop position is defense. And here's another angle to look at this. You've got Austin Riley, who's still owed 150 plus million. You've got Ronald Acuna Jr., who signed long term, who you obviously want to keep around for the entirety of his career. If you give Bo Bichette 200 plus million to go with those guys, then you've got Ronald Acuna Jr., Austin Riley, as well as Bo Bichette, who have massive money that is owed to them well into their 30s, and each one of them probably is going to become at least somewhat of a liability wherever they are on the diamond defensively. And that's going to be a hard thing to overcome no matter how much offense they can provide. So I don't know if Alex Anthopoulos is going to go that route. Now, Corey Seager, we could talk about him as well. That could be an angle that they look at potentially. But again, I agree with you. It does not seem likely because it would just go kind of against how Alex has operated throughout his time with the Braves.
And, one interesting thought with Bichette is, okay, maybe he's not a shortstop over the course of the 7 years on his contract, but you could probably play Bichette at shortstop for a year or two and see how it goes. And then if and when Ozzie Albies is no longer on the team, you could move Bichette to second base for the final 4 or 5 years of his deal. But you're right, Sean. I mean, this team already has some pretty big financial commitments to Riley. Matt Olson is also owed a large amount of money at first base as well. And you mentioned Acuna. As long as the Braves want to keep him, and God, let's hope so, Acuna is probably going to get a $300 million contract one day, assuming his knees hold up. So for that reason, I don't think Bichette is necessarily likely, but I wouldn't say it's a 0%. And then on Corey Seager, I mean, I love Corey Seager. He's such a talented ball player. I have PTSD from when he single-handedly beat the Braves in the NLCS. Was that 2020, I think, in the bubble year, where he had like a 2,000 OPS in that NLCS against Atlanta. He does have injury concerns, though, and because he has 6 years and $189 million left on that contract in Texas, I just don't think the Rangers are going to fully punt. If the Braves had some expendable young major league ready players ready to trade, then maybe, but I just don't see it either. I would love Seager. If Seager comes on, man, we will do a 4-man podcast talking about how excited we are about it. I will believe it when I see it if Texas actually trades him.
Absolutely. But in wrapping up, the shortstop side of things, because again, I know we've talked about it kind of, at length, but it's because it's such a big need. And one of the reasons why also that Alex Anthopoulos has focused on it as a need is because, you look at the Braves middle infield situation, it's been pretty, if there's the offense overall has underperformed. But a big reason why is because, again, up the middle, the Braves have just had months and months of near league worst offensive production. And that, a lot, of course, goes along with Ozzie Albies, who's dealt with injuries. He's dealt with having to try to come back from those wrist injuries that has kind of sapped his overall offensive potential. Got a couple of questions, even, asking, is Ozzie Albies an everyday player? Now, I think if healthy, that absolutely is the case. But I also don't blame the Braves for kind of, needing to have a bigger insurance plan in the case that's not what's in place for Ozzie Albies. That's why they have Mauricio Dubon. So if Albies, were to come into the year still recovering from injury, Dubon may need to play more second base, which makes shortstop even bigger of a need. That is one theme that came with these mailbag questions that I definitely think is, worth mentioning. The middle infield as a whole is something that the Braves need to continue gaining certainty in.
It really, really sucks that Ozzie broke his wrist again or broke his hand or whatever little bone it was that he broke towards the end of the season, because we saw there was really no power early in the year. But then Ozzie was terrific in the second half and was really hitting the ball, hitting for power, doing the things that make Ozzie Albies such a successful baseball player for the entirety of his career. And then he has another hand injury. And for a player who really has to get home on power because he's never been an on-base guy, he has a decent batting average, but Ozzie Albies hits for power in order to get there offensively. It really stunk that he hurt himself in basically a meaningless game towards the end of the season. And you're right, man. Like, if Ozzie comes back and he just doesn't have any power, like if Mauricio Dubon is playing shortstop every day, you don't really have an option at that point. I mean, I'm sure the Braves will have somebody in Gwinnett who could play second base if Ozzie Albies just isn't right. But that's also why I think adding a shortstop is so important. It would free up Mauricio Dubon, who would be a totally fine second baseman, would be an elite glove there. And truthfully, I mean, if you simmed it out 1,000 times, Shawn, with Ozzie Albies at second base in 2026 and Mauricio Dubon at second base in 2026, I would take Ozzie Albies. But I also don't think it's like an absolute no-brainer. I mean, Mauricio Dubon would be totally fine at second base. And I mean, frankly, the Braves might need him at some point to fill in if Ozzie just doesn't have the pop that he used to have.
And let's not forget, if you go out and get like a Ha-Seong Kim, for instance, if Ozzie were to not be available, you could always play Ha-Seong Kim at second and then play Dubon at shortstop. And that way you would be able to maximize your defense. So, the Braves definitely need to find, what they can. Another, fun question that many asked us, if we were to say today who our starting shortstop would be, I know that Ha-Seong Kim is the fun answer. Underrated answer to me, I really like Ezekiel Tovar of the Colorado Rockies. I know that offensively he's not shown a lot, but power projection wise, there's a lot of those projection systems that kind of like him. Plus the defense has been there in the past. I think that he could be an option as well. So the Braves could go a lot of different ways, but I think that a spotlight needs to remain on just how important it is for the Braves to continue to explore those ways to really find some certainty if it can be a long-term option at the shortstop position. But that's not the only need. And that wasn't the only focus of our mailbag questions. We're going to get into another fun focus of our mailbag question, the rotation, here in just a moment after a word from our partners.
For all the parents out there with teenagers like Kratz, we know life's a little crazy.
Yeah, Cash App's here to not add to the craziness. They're here to help.
With the Cash App card, available to teens 13 to 17 with sponsorship by an eligible parent or guardian, every transaction triggers a real-time notification for you to see, empowering your teen to practice independence while giving you peace of mind by keeping track of their spending. You can also manage everything directly from your own Cash App account without having to switch between the two. With the Cash App card, you and your teen's balances receive 24/7 fraud monitoring, and if something ever feels off, you have the ability to lock their card right from your phone in just one tap. For a limited time, new Cash App customers can earn $10 if they use code FAMILY10 in their profile at sign up and send $5 to a friend within 14 days. Terms apply. Cash App is a financial services platform, not a bank. Banking services provided by Cash App's bank partner. Prepaid debit cards issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC. Direct deposit and promotions provided by Cash App, a Block Inc. brand. Visit cash.app/legal/podcast for full disclosures.
So, Scott, of course, the Braves, again, have done some heavy lifting so far compared to other teams this offseason. But another theme of our mailbag questions that we got multiple versions of was, what would the Braves' next move look like for this team? Again, they made some moves. They've shored up the bullpen. They've added to utility man. They've added to the outfield depth. Those were kind of the secondary needs. Shortstop and starting pitching depth remain, the main needs of this team. And I think naturally starting pitching is probably going to be the best way to go for a couple of reasons. Number one, Merrill Kelly today, someone who made sense for the Braves. He signed a 2-year, $40 million deal with Arizona, and we're starting to see the starting pitching market. Michael King may be close to signing. We're starting to see the starting pitching market start to move as well. There are plenty of options out there that aren't necessarily top of the rotation, but are reliable depth. And with the fact that the Braves have gotten some quality production from their staff when they're healthy, but them being healthy has been so infrequent, that type of depth signing for this Braves team really makes sense as the next move, because on the shortstop front of things, likely is going to take time to really figure out what option makes the most sense.
We've said for 6 weeks on the show now how much we want the Braves to add a starting pitcher of some kind. It was a bummer to see Merrill Kelly go back to Arizona, because he was somebody who I thought made sense for Atlanta. Again, not an ace, but somebody who could eat innings. And, I was going through the top 50 free agents list today, and there are quite a few starting pitchers who might make sense for the Braves. So let's quickly go through them. There's kind of a big four at the top: Framber Valdez, Ranger Suarez, Michael King, Zach Gallen. Then there are two guys who are maybe starters or maybe relievers, kind of in that middle tier. Be interesting to know if the Braves are interested in Brad Keller or Nick Martinez. Both of those guys would be in a similar mold to Grant Holmes, Ronaldo Lopez. You could probably figure out what you wanted to do with them come spring training. You also have a couple of guys towards the bottom of the top 50 list. And again, these would be kind of bottom barrel options: Zach Littell, Tyler Mahle. Like, those guys are not going to get a big reaction from anybody, but you can probably pencil them in for 150 innings next year, a very boring 4 ERA. And we've seen that we feel good about the pitching staff depth. And then it's like, oh my God, Carlos Carrasco is starting tomorrow. Or pick one of the dozen or so just awful starters who pitched over this past season. And then there's the AARP club. Justin Verlander is still around, apparently wants to still pitch. Same for Max Scherzer. I have no interest in those types, but I'm sure somebody will give them a decent contract. So all of that is to say, Sean, I really hope the Braves add a starter. The free agent market has kind of shrunk a little bit. And the one name I didn't mention here, who I think is maybe the most probable or possible, would be Chris Bassett. And I held his name off for a reason, because Chris Bassett is a veteran. He's very durable. He pitched really well for Toronto this past season. Also pitched out of the bullpen in the playoffs. Bassett feels like somebody, if he gets a reasonable contract, that it could be the Braves. It could be a 1-year deal. It could be a 2-year deal. It could be a 1 year plus a club option. But to me, if the Braves go the free agent route, my guess, if I had to put cold hard cash on it, would be Chris Bassett is probably the front runner in the clubhouse for me.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense. He and that's the other thing that's kind of in there as well. He pitched pretty well in the Blue Jays World Series run. Like, I think he did his job, and he also pitched out of the bullpen. So he showed some versatility there as well. So getting that type of guy who is reliable, is durable, but also has got that playoff experience, I think it makes sense. Steven mentioned on y'all's excellent coverage of Robert Suarez, the Braves, have consistently shown a preference when it comes to adding arms, that they highly value arms that have strong strikeout to walk ratios. And I kind of looked at that of the available, options that are out there. I don't think the Braves are going to go the trade route. Like, I don't think that it makes a lot of sense for the Braves to try to go after a top tier pitcher all that much. But some names that are out there that kind of, stand out because of how well they do in strikeout versus walk ratio. Zach Eflin is another name. He's got a bit of injury concern, so he may not necessarily be the most sensible for the Braves, but it was rumored that Alex Anthopoulos had interest in him in the past. It was because of his strong strikeout to walk ratio. Littell is certainly someone that could make sense as well. And you never know. the Braves also could look at a route of going after pitchers that they have had interest in the past or that has been connected to their staff in the past. Luis Severino, Nathan Eovaldi, Nick Pivetta. Names like that could make sense on the trade market for the Braves. Again, I don't necessarily know if they're wanting to pay that prospect price, but I think it makes sense, and veteran, durable, some playoff experience, and good control. There are plenty of options out there that could make sense for the Braves to go after, and I think that's the type of target that's there and that's needed for this team.
So let me ask you, Shawn, because I know I answered this or talked about this with Steven the other day, but of the big four starting pitchers, Framber Valdez, Ranger Suarez, Michael King, assuming he doesn't sign by the time people listen to the show, and Zach Gallen, all four have qualifying offers attached, so it would cost Atlanta's first-round pick. I'm sorry, the PPI, the late first-round pick 26. But it's hard to deny with a straight face that all four of those at varying levels would make the Braves a much improved baseball team, at least in 26, 27, 28. Where are you at? Like, are you okay giving up the 26th pick? Would you rather not? Would you rather hang on to it and then maybe try to either sign a middle tier starter or make a trade for one of them? Where are you at with that?
I wouldn't want to give up that 26th pick. And the reason why I say that is because I don't necessarily know if it makes the most sense for the Braves to go give 75 to 100 plus million to a pitcher plus give up that high pick in this draft. I would much rather than potentially go I would much rather pay the prospect price to go get a Nick Pivetta or a Nathan Eovaldi and still maintain that pick that allows for us to be able, because then you have one of those guys on a 2 to 3 year deal, 50 million or less that's owed to them. Plus you still have that pick in the draft to recoup what you've traded. That's the route that I would go personally. And that's my thought. If I were to choose any of those four, I do like Zach Gallen, but I do feel that he's had a bit of a drop off here recently. I probably would go Ranger Suarez just because that's who the Braves are the most familiar with. I think that he will age well based off his stuff and everything. And I think that also he wouldn't necessarily break the bank. A 5 year somewhere in the low 100s, I think that he would possibly make the most sense. But if the Braves are really going, or if the Braves are going for like a number 2 type starter, I would try to potentially trade for someone that's on the market, then give up the pick, plus go out and spend 100 plus million in free agency.
The one pitcher's name who we have not mentioned, who might be the best of both worlds, where you would not lose the qualifying offer draft pick and you would not have to give up prospects in trade, is Tatsuya Amai, who has been posted, is available. He's a fascinating pitcher. He's very thin, like he's tiny. I think he's like 5'10", 160 pounds. So that's not what you generally see from starting pitchers in Major League Baseball. But Amai has a deep repertoire of pitches, and he's younger. And he's somebody, if the Braves could convince him to come to Atlanta, and of course, historically, there's not been a ton of Asian free agents who have come to Atlanta over the years, but there's always a first, or the first in a long time. I think on paper, if the Braves feel like Amai is going to translate over to the majors and be at worst a number 3 starter for what they're going to have to pay, maybe a number 4 starter, depending on the contract he's going to get. Tatsuya Amai is also someone who I would hope they've at least had conversations about, or maybe even reached out to see what his interest level would be pitching in Atlanta.
That actually brings back to mind a very interesting question that we got from a previous mailbag. Let's do this. Let's take another break real quick, and I want to come back and get your thoughts on that exact avenue towards roster construction, AA, and looking at those foreign players, especially the Asian players. More on that in just a moment. So, Scott, in a previous mailbag, we had gotten a question, and I'm paraphrasing here, that had kind of been summed up as, why doesn't it seem as if the Braves really, dabble in that market, dabble in the Japanese or the foreign market, especially when it comes to Asian players like other teams do? And I found it a very fascinating question. And I feel like, you can go into, we could probably do a whole podcast on this, but I think it comes up into 2 key things. Number one, you're talking about teams having to commit substantial financial resources up front to these players, because these aren't players who come with cheap years of control like draft picks do. You've got to sign them to major free agent deals. And the other thing that's well known is that Alex Anthopoulos looks at a lot of different things when it comes to adding talent to the roster, how they fit in the clubhouse, opinions of, the type of work ethic that they have, how he thinks they'll project as they age, all that different stuff. It's probably harder to do that when you don't have as much information on these players who are not in, the United States, than, those players that you've seen in the majors or you've seen growth in the different systems in the U.S. I think the fact that Alex doesn't typically go with significant financial commitments through the free agent market, and he probably doesn't know as much about these players, those are two reasons why he's not really dabbled into that market. But when we talk about, hey, Alex, it's probably time for you to do things differently than you've done in the past, Amai would be the type of addition that could make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, of course, in free agency, it's a two-way dance, right? And we don't know. He did come out and say publicly, like, why would I want to go play for the Dodgers? I want to beat the Dodgers, which is such a great mindset to have. I would be all for it. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend like I know what Tetsuya Amai is looking for and where he wants to live, what part of the country he wants to live in, if he has other friends in Major League Baseball who he might want to go play with, who he knows from his playing days. But you're right. Like, there's not the ability. So whenever I think what you're saying, Shawn, is whenever Alex Anthopoulos goes out and acquires someone, it feels like in every press conference, he talks about, hey, I talked to this guy's third grade teacher to ask what kind of person Shawn is, or I talked to his teammates, or I talked to his former coach. And that might be something Alex almost has as like a prerequisite before committing hundreds of millions of dollars in this case to a player. But again, Tetsuya Amai, he checks a lot of boxes. It would not cost the draft pick. It would not cost prospects. It would cost money. They'd also have to pay the posting fee in order to sign him. But I think Amai has to sign within like the next 2 weeks or so, because they only get a certain amount of time once they are posted. Hey, if the Braves want to take a chance and try to build a pipeline, I would be all for it. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to happen, but I would happily be wrong.
Yeah. It's when we talk about, going the routes that we've not in the past to try to get back to where we want to get as a contender, that to me would be the type of route to go that we've not really explored in the past, but could pay huge dividends in the present to really get us back to where we want to go. Couple of other fun questions that I think are worth exploring as well. Of course, we talk about all these moves, Scott. The one thing that you need to have in place is the room in your payroll to get that done. A couple of questions that came to us. The Braves, again, the one thing, again, that we're excited about when it comes to this offseason, nobody can say the Braves aren't spending. They are spending, and they're taking care of needs that are there. There were a lot of needs. They're addressing them, and they're spending money to do it. But kind of where is payroll at? We talk about shortstop. We talk about starting pitching. Scott, do we feel that the resources are there to add significant options on both ends? Is the money there to support that? I feel that it is, but a bit more detail I think would suffice.
Yeah, great question from AJ about where Braves payroll currently stands. And I will say, we will not go 20 minutes here on the complexities of payroll, CBT versus cash.
No PowerPoint presentation, no pictures, no PowerPoint presentation.
It is a messy system, but the easiest way to say it, and the question was about the Braves, is CBT payroll, which is the luxury tax. Currently, the Braves are estimated or projected to have a current CBT payroll of about $232 million. Okay, $232 million. The luxury tax for 2026 is $244 million. So currently the Braves are under the tax still, even though they've added these pitchers and Yastrzemski and Dubon this offseason, the Braves are still about $12 million, give or take, below the luxury tax. That being said, you would hope, and I'm going to be really disappointed if this is it for the Braves offseason, but you would hope that they are willing to go into the luxury tax to add a starting pitcher and or a shortstop and or one more middle relief arm to really round out this team. I will say the first tier of luxury tax is $244 million. Then the next tier is $20 million more, so $264. And then the second tier, going up to the third tier, is $284 million. So if the Braves, and then the top tier of the luxury tax, you lose draft, it starts impacting your draft picks. I don't think the Braves are going to go above $284 million. But there is a world where the Braves might still have $40 million to spend, 35, 40, 45 million. We also know that Alex Anthopoulos wants to hold back some money for the trade deadline. Hopefully the team is much better, and he's going to want some cash to go out and add whatever he needs to add come July 31st. But to answer the question about the CBT payroll, the Braves are currently at $232 million, give or take. The luxury tax begins at $244, goes to $264. Penalties get a little bit worse if you exceed $264. It's really that $284 million figure where you get hit the hardest. I don't think the Braves are going to go above that. But in a good world, Shawn, like you could tell me if the Braves have $40 million to spend, they can absolutely go get a shortstop and a starting pitcher and maybe even a reliever and have us all really damn excited about opening day and the Braves' chances.
Yeah, if you've made the moves that you made so far, if you've spent the money that you made so far, it's definitely better than last offseason. But I agree with Scott. It's going to be disappointing if we made these moves and yet we don't do something at least notable to significant, at least on one of the starting pitching or shortstop fronts. Like, again, we made all these moves, but offensive underperformance and starting pitching depth, those two remain big questions for this team moving forward. And you talk about keeping money into the season. I agree with you. Adding money where we're weak, adding money where we need to, get better, but also the potential to where you got to go get a player because you've got multiple players out with significant injuries. That's also played a big part into things. So it's good to have all that money. Alex Anthopoulos is not going to spend just to spend, but it's the time to spend. All the factors are there that make it make sense. Now, one last thing, and I asked Robert Murray about this, and we got a couple of questions in the mailbag about this would impact payroll. When the Braves talk with these players about signing extensions and when they commit to them and all that different stuff, that's obviously the Braves wanting the players to buy into Atlanta, right? But it's Atlanta buying into these players. And, when it comes to, the players signing these extensions, we know how, again, when going back to how thoroughly Alex Anthopoulos vets players before he adds them, he also has shown a tendency to be very loyal to these players. But could it make sense for him to move on from someone? Could it make sense for him to potentially move someone if he wants to go add another, and that could impact payroll? Scott, what are your thoughts on that? Again, Sean Murphy comes to mind. It's a thought that's out there, but it's highly unlikely for several reasons, I think.
So Alex has said publicly before that when the Braves sign players to these long-term extensions, that they view it as a two-way agreement that you're going to be with the Braves for the foreseeable future.
Yes.
That being said, and I take that as we're not going to trade you in year 1 or 2 of your extension. But that being said, like Sean Murphy, for example, got a 6-year contract from the Braves. We're halfway home. So if there's a deal to trade Sean Murphy, I mean, maybe Murph doesn't want to leave Atlanta, but you're halfway through and you make $15 million a year. Like, to me, that's fine. Like, that's all fair game. Or, Spencer Strider signed his long-term deal. I think he's making $20 million the next couple of years. If the Braves, I don't think it's likely, but if there was a deal for Strider to be had in a year's time, or who knows where the Braves will be, like, I feel like that's all within the game, right? Like, I think what Alex says by that is we're not going to trade you in year 2 of a 9-year contract. But I think, of course, like, everything has to be on the table at this point. If these guys are all adults, they're all big boys, they're paid a lot of money. If they get traded to another city for the last couple of years of their contracts, maybe they don't love it, but it's all part of the equation.
The other thing that comes into that equation that, again, I think probably is the biggest reason why it's unlikely, even more than, Alex's loyalty to these players, you just don't have a lot of them right now that are at high value for the Braves to trade, right? Like, we don't know where Sean Murphy's going to be when it comes to his, readiness for opening day. And, Alex Riley has really underperformed.
Austin Riley, YouTube's going to come get you.
I'm sorry about that. I'm thinking WWE here. Austin Riley, my bad. Ozzie Albies, obviously, he's got a multi-year contract, underperformed. Michael Harris, underperformed. That's the other thing about this is that, again, we talk about all these moves being added. The biggest component to us getting back to being a contender offensively is the players that we've got signed to long-term extensions getting back to their normal selves. That's without saying. And because of the fact that so many of them need to get back there, that I think is the biggest factor as to why it's unlikely any of them are moved, is because Alex is not going to move these guys and potentially have to add to them to move them. That's the case with some of these players. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it could in the right deal, but I think it's unlikely. So, yes, to answer the question directly, I do feel that there's definitely a factor there. Alex is loyal to guys that he signs long term, but another big factor in making it unlikely there to move off any of those contracts now is that just so few of them make sense to move because you want them to perform better. And if they do, they obviously help Atlanta likely than any trade package they get back.
Yeah, I know it's Twitter, it's the off season, it's time to have discussions, but I see talk about, well, we could trade Michael Harris as part of a big deal. Michael Harris's value has quite literally never been lower in the entire, maybe that's not true. Maybe it was lower in the middle of the season when he was the worst hitter in baseball. And then he had the really great month and then kind of ended the year on a not great note. But, Michael Harris, his contract is not great at the moment. Same for Sean Murphy. You mentioned, I mean, he had significant hip injury, he had surgery for it. You're not going to be able to trade Sean Murphy right now because of all the medical questions. And it just feels like it'd be selling low on a lot of these guys who are even potentially tradable. Of course, you're not trading Olsen or Riley or Acuna or, those guys are just absolutely set in stone. But I do think over the next year or two, as the Braves really evaluate their roster, of course, you have to think about basically everyone other than a couple players on the roster as tradable. You're not looking to just give them away, but you have to be flexible in trying to get the best deal done.
Absolutely. And I think that Alex Anthopoulos realizes that. He knows that he's kind of at a point to where, listen, I've invested in these guys. Past couple of years, it's not worked to the level that we need to. So, again, outside the box, how we've done things to this point has not gotten us where we want to go. So we've got to change some things up to get where we want to go. Scott, anything else from you? Feel like we've covered a lot of different segments from a lot of different perspectives that we have in the past. Anything else for you? Thank you for all the questions, by the way, from everyone that participated. But hey, I'll finally get to it. Scott, anything else from you as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast?
No, nothing really from me. I will echo Sean. A big thank you to the community for always having questions. We got a million of them. We'll try to get to more of them. We are coming up on a pretty quiet time in the off-season calendar, as we said, usually between Christmas and maybe the first week of the new year. It's usually pretty quiet, and then you do get a flurry of activity before everyone starts to report and think about spring training in February. But as always, a big thanks to everybody for tuning in, and we will have plenty of content this week. And who knows, Sean, the way this offseason's going, maybe we'll get together in a couple of days and do another emergency podcast because the Braves have made another signing or trade.
Absolutely. And we'll see what happens. And, again, don't necessarily, know, with the, I believe that it will be towards the new year. But of course, there's a couple of other storylines to certainly watch out for. You've got International Signing Day that's coming up, Andrew Jones's Hall of Fame pursuit as well. That's coming up in the next several weeks. So plenty of things to certainly talk about. We're going to have you covered throughout the rest of the offseason. Hammer Territory across all forms of social media for the Foul Territory family of podcasts. Can't thank you enough for joining us. For Scott Coleman, Shawn Coleman, Coleman and Coleman Law Firm, signing off. Until next time, go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.